In this video, we're going to be talking about 7 things that rich people do that poor people don't. Rich people are super intentional. There's a reason for everything. Nothing is left to chance. Nothing is happenstance. Nothing is, ideally, I don't want to say nothing is reactive, but generally their life is responsive and pre-planned. So what we're going to do is actually break down 7 ways that manifests. The first thing is media, what they consume. If you go to virtually any inspirational, motivational, page on Instagram or Facebook around habits of the rich, one of the things you'll see is that it always says read books. Famously Warren Buffett says he reads a book every single day, or all these CEOs read so many hours a day. And I can tell you, as a CEO, when I was the CEO of a company, I've been the CEO of a couple companies now, when I would go talk to other people and investors and executives and say, what does a CEO do? One of the things they all said uniformly is read lots of books, because your job as the strategic leader or the visionary kind of director of an organization is to understand what's going on out there and try to see the future. And the great thing I've learned from reading so many books, it literally teaches you how to be smarter than you are. Because there's a lot of books, unless you're the smartest person on earth, which I'm guessing you're not. Certainly know I'm not. There's a lot of books that are written by people that are smarter than you, or that think differently than you, or have different perspectives than you. And it's one thing to just hear somebody tell you their perspective or hear somebody share their observation. But a book is this really, really long, intricate, nuanced, finely crafted chain of thought. In a good book, every sentence leads to the next sentence, and it goes on for dozens of hours, right? And so it gives you an opportunity to step into the thought track of a really intelligent person who's really, really informed on a subject. And by the time you come out of it, your brain has literally had new grooves carved in it, new wiring connected inside your brain. It's basically a way to learn how to think like really smart people think. Now, you're not getting that from serial TV shows. You're not getting that from sketch comedy. You're not getting that from things that are just designed to entertain. They literally work on different receptors of the brain. Things that are more like relaxation-based entertainment, they work on different receptors of the brain than things that are more proactive, and where you have to actually think and process what's being said. It takes more energy to read a book. But again, it's all about intentionality. If you start with, why am I consuming this media? What is the outcome that I want to get from this media? It's the difference between listening to just, pop music on the radio for hours and hours and maybe listening to like a Tim Ferriss podcast or a Lex Fridman podcast or something, where you're probably going to have to stop it at some point and really think about what you just heard and process it. But if the intention is to modify the way that you think, you're going to completely change the media that you consume. The second thing has to do with how they make money. It's a fact, most poor people live off of one stream of income. Most aspirationally wealthy people are adding multiple streams of income, and most of what we classically consider to be wealthy people, which in the modern economy is a multi-millionaire, typically at least 4 or 5 million, or some people would argue you need to be like a deca-millionaire to be considered wealthy now. I mean, that's it. That's a fact. So I think what you have to do when it comes to intentionality is ask, who benefits from the way I generate income? So if you generate income from one source, what are all the implications of that, right? There's dependency on that single source. There's a lack of lateral mobility, whether it's geographically, whether it's in terms of career, whether it's in terms of being able to take time off, whether it's in terms of being able to be more engaged with your family. So who's benefiting from your singular dependence on one source of income? Even if it's a good amount of income, who benefits and who suffers? And typically, whoever benefits is not going to be you, and who suffers is going to be you, or it's going to be the people closest to you. And I can tell you from experience of having stacked multiple streams of income, that as your income diversifies, the beneficiaries come closer, and the people that, I won't say they suffer, but they're less, they benefit less from that reality, are the people further away. So like if you're dependent on one source of income, your employer is benefiting, you and your family are suffering. If you have multiple streams of income, you and your family are benefiting, and your employer is suffering from the standpoint of you are less dependent on them, which means you're less likely to come put in ridiculous hours. You're less likely to, work on Christmas Day. You're less likely to do something unethical just because your boss asks you to do, right? It's about power. It's about control. It's about intentionality, and multiple streams of income are one of the strongest, hallmarks of wealthy, successful people. All right, we've got 5 more of these to go through that wealthy or rich people do that poor people don't. But before we do that, if I've got you thinking and you're like, oh, I'd like to make some extra money or diversify my income streams or just learn more about what's out there, I've put together a great guidebook for you. There's a link below the video. Go ahead and click that and you can feel free to learn more about how you can start to move up the ladder and do more of these things that the wealthier people do. And the third thing is around planning and visioning. So you've probably heard of a vision board and you've probably rolled your eyes at the idea of a vision board. I know I have too. And then I actually did one. And then I actually started creating a clear, vivid picture of what I wanted my life to look like. I started putting things that I wanted on there, not just material things, but images that represented impact and the type of life that I wanted to live. And I promise, it's basically one of those things, don't knock it till you've tried it. Wealthy people tend to have very, very clear pictures of what they want their life to look like, and then they live in deep intentionality around creating that life. And the reason this is so important is, what does your mind do if you don't have something to focus on? If you don't have a clear picture or a clear idea, what fills the void or the vacuum? It's negative stuff. We tend to, and this is because in the absence of conscious exertion of energy or exertion of energy in our conscious or from our conscious mind, our subconscious fills the void, and our subconscious is designed to do what? To keep us alive. And how does it keep us alive? It tells us all the horrible things that could go wrong so that we'll avoid them. And we start worrying. But unfortunately, worrying or whatever we introduce into our conscious mind, the whole concept of consciousness, without getting too metaphysical, is that it basically changes the energy state of whatever we're focused on. We have all this stuff in our brain and it's all swirling around all the time, and it's mostly operating in the kind of the lugubrious depths of the subconscious, and the subconscious is going to serve up an idea into consciousness in the absence of a clear picture of this vision that we're talking about, and say, hey, here's something that could go wrong. You need to worry about this. Well, now that thing is conscious, and consciousness is a form of energy, right? So now you're giving energy to the thing that you don't want to have happen. Have you ever heard the term worrying is like praying for what you don't want? That's what happens in the absence of a really big, bright, bold, vivid image of what you want your life to look like. And by the way, it has to be an image. It can't just be words, because the subconscious it exists in the cerebellum, the part of the mind that doesn't have language processing. So your subconscious can't be steered by words. It has to be steered by images. So you have to have this picture, because otherwise your subconscious will start serving ideas up into consciousness that aren't what you want, and whatever you feed gets bigger, and whatever you worry about is essentially what you're praying for. So having that clear picture of the life that you want, incredibly important, and not just letting the mind fill your thoughts with other concerns or anxieties. And then the fourth thing is time management. This is so important. This is something, although I will say as a musician, I was I was a musician in my 20s, and then I've been an entrepreneur in my 30s. I knew from being inside the world of music that you can be doing all the right things, but if you're not doing them inside a logical organizational structure of time, especially in congruency with how other people's time is organized, then it doesn't matter if you hit all the right notes. It's not even music. But then as soon as you impose the grid of structured time on everything, it all starts to line up, and magical harmony can happen, and people can start to feel, and people can start to sing along, and you can literally change the world with music just by imposing time on sound, right? So why aren't we doing the same thing to our life? I don't know why it took me a decade to figure this out, but when I finally started paying attention to time management, everything changed. And it was mostly because I was exposed to other people that had strong opinions about this, and they basically started pointing out that, like, hey, Jeff, you say you want this result, but instead you're getting this result, but you're being flippant about time, and that's probably why, and insanity is doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different result. Why don't you try being a little more organized with your time and stop acting like because you're some creative musician that puts you above things like actually showing up to appointments or actually keeping a calendar, right? And once it clicked how positive the impact of valuing time was, I started going really deep into it, to the point where now every single minute of my life, other than a couple hours I have in the evening that are basically my family flex time, that are preset to be more fluid and fun with my family, other than that, every single minute of my life is basically predetermined. And I'll tell you, the power of intentionality with time is so potent. And one of the biggest reasons is because it frees you from the anxiety of feeling like something's missing or you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. It essentially reduces the constant need to be making a decision about what to do. If every minute of your day is simply following a script of what you wrote out beforehand on the basis of your goals and your resources, and time is a resource, you're not constantly living in this anxious place that's depleting energy of like, well, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing, or is there something I'm forgetting? And then if you find that something's off, if something isn't working, instead of making a improvisational change on the fly where you're gonna have to wonder how that's gonna impact all these other things, you go back to the plan. You go back to the time management plan and say, okay, does anything need to shift? Intentionality around time management. And the fifth thing that differentiates rich and poor is working for money. Poor people are typically thinking about how they can trade their time for money, in the sense that money is the primary currency by which they're valuing their productive time. I can say that my experience is the more you think about other types of currencies, which would be impact or alignment or creating team energy or driving towards meaningful goals, and not just calculating time in terms of dollars and cents, some really, really magical things start to happen. The mindset of needing money is a selfish mindset. And that's not a judgment, it's a reality. I mean, frankly, if a person who's been wandering in the desert for a week and hasn't had a bite of food and then suddenly shows up at a all-you-can-eat Chinese buffet probably has a very selfish mindset toward the buffet, which is, I want to consume as much of this as possible, give me all a plate of General Tso's chicken, right? Like you're selfish when you're in deprivation mode. When you start thinking about different types of currency, how can I create impact? How can I create growth? How can I create a contagion of opportunity in the world that gives other people opportunities? When you start thinking in those terms with your time, which may be terrifying to do if you actually don't have a lot of money, something magical happens, which is you become a lot more attractive. Because the reality is there are 7 billion people in this world who all feel like they need more money. And if you push them and you say, oh, you just want money, you're being greedy, they say, no, I'm doing it for my family, or I'm doing it for my loved ones. Like, this is the lowest common denominator reason why people do what they do is I need money to survive, or I want to take care of my family or my loved ones. But that's what everybody says. And if we know anything about attraction is connoted or connected to rarity. When things are common, they're less attractive. When things are rare or special, they tend to be more attractive, right? So if everybody's working for money, or everybody's working to take care of the people they love, then other people aren't going to be attracted to that as a reasoning for doing work, right? And I know a lot of us find nobility in like, well, I'm just trying to take care of my family. But you're not attracting more abundance. You're not attracting really dynamic, high energy people. You're not attracting high value relationships. You're not attracting opportunity if your reason why you're working is the same as everybody else's. But when your reason why you're working is suddenly about the impact that you want to have, or the problem that you want to solve, or the growth that you want to create, or the movement or change that you want to galvanize in humanity, that's a more attractive reason to do work, which means you're going to attract more of the things that you want. You're going to attract more money. You're going to attract more people that bring more opportunity. And so starting to change your mindset around the currency that you're essentially trading your time for is one of the ways that you become wealthy. And it's one of the things that, in my experience, wealthy people have already done. There's only 2 ways to get wealthy in this world. You can either be obsessed with money, or you can be obsessed with impact. And if you're obsessed with money, you might make a lot of money, but there's typically going to be a lot of collateral damage and ultimately not a lot of joy. But if you're obsessed with growth and impact and excellence and kind of some of the more positive, noble qualities, it's actually reasonably likely that if money is also of interest to you, you're going to be able to attract as much of it as you need. And again, I know that can be kind of a scary thing to say, but just think about it in terms of attraction. Am I likely to attract things, people, opportunities, money, etc., if I'm doing what everybody else is doing, which is trading time for money? Or am I more likely to attract the things I want if I'm doing something more rare and special, which is trading my time for impact or some of these other more noble goals? And the 6th thing is all about your environment, your surroundings, your influences. You've probably heard that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So one of the questions I get around this is people say, well, I can't afford a new house. I can't afford to move neighborhoods. I can't fire my family. How do I change my environment when I'm kind of stuck in my environment? What I would say is the starting point is learning certain skills. And this video is not going to necessarily teach you these skills, but the reality is you're going to have to get better at maintaining boundaries, right? Like starting to distance yourself subtly. You don't want to create confrontation. You don't want to create explosive situations. And typically the more toxic your environment is, the more volatile it can be if you try to change it. So really, really subtly and intelligently learning to kind of create some safe space, create a little more arm's length relationships, create a little better boundaries, practicing in the mirror. And by the way, I've literally done this. Like, how do I decline an invitation to one of those things where it's like, well, everybody's going and it's gonna be so fun and people are gonna be there, and you're like, maybe in your mind, you're like, no, I really wanna stay home and work on my business, or I really, essentially how to kind of back away from peer pressure, how to politely decline an invitation, right? Another skill would be how to cut conversations short. What if you could take every interaction with every person around you that isn't inspiring you in some way, doesn't have sort of a positive vertical magnetism that's drawing you in the direction of something that you're wanting to evolve about your life. You took every relationship that isn't one of those and said, I'm going to work on trimming the duration of those interactions. I'm going to get better at cutting conversations short to create the space to go find some new relationships, or to go find even some time to get into new environments, right? So a lot of it is kind of doing some work on your social strategy to create boundaries, and reduce the impact of negative relationships, and even decline invitations to be in certain situations. This will pay huge dividends. I've actually coached people through doing this kind of work, and it's amazing what these small shifts compounded over the course of a year. You'll find yourself in a completely different life that you don't even recognize, where all these things that seemed impossible suddenly seem inevitable. And the 7th thing that rich people do that poor people don't on a daily basis is we love us some change. Change is awesome. Change is opportunity. Change is growth. Change is proof of life. Change is affirmation that I am not stuck in that purgatory where progress cannot find purchase, known as my comfort zone. The only way that anything changes in a biological organism is adaptation to stress, right? You have to have stress. Stress is a catalyst. When we adapt to that stress, it gives us an opportunity to improve. I think there's 2 different types of stress. There's a permanent, maybe not permanent, but sort of a long form systemic neurological stress where we're running on adrenaline and we're running on cortisol and we're operating from our sympathetic nervous system, where in the poverty state, you're so white knuckled and redlined that although you are in stress, it's not a stress that you can adapt to, because it's a stress that's kind of settled in. It's not a stress of change. It's actually a stress of stasis. It's just a stasis that's out of balance, right? So I'm talking about changing things up. It's ironic because a lot of time, when I'll work with people, and unfortunately I don't get to do as much one-on-one work now as I used to, but in the past, when I used to work with people that were kind of in this systemic stress place, where maybe in a state of deprivation or lack, their biggest fear is things staying the same and never changing. But the way they respond or react in life is as if their biggest fear is anything changing. So it's like they're going through life white knuckling in desperation, like I need things to change, I need things to change. But as soon as something changes, they act like it's got to be the enemy. They respond like it's a negative. And so that's part of the paralysis. I need my life to change, but I'm terrified of change. The reality is there is opportunity in every fluctuation. There is opportunity in every deviation or change. And if you're in that state where you're wanting things to change, you need to start changing things, right? Like you say, if nothing changes, nothing changes. And so learning to love change and learning to be, and ultimately it comes down to optimism. Like now, when things change in my life, and again, I didn't always live this way, I am so conditioned now to ask the question, man, something changed. What can be great about this? That's one of the biggest things, again, the final thing, the 7th thing here for this video that I've observed as a difference between rich people and poor people is rich people are great at embracing change and finding the upside of change, and then even like leaning into the change to work to create that upside. A lot of poor people, even though they want things to change, they also react in terror when anything changes. Okay, so that is 7 things that rich people do every day that poor people, I don't think do as much. I don't want to be totally black and white and say they never do those things, but I don't think it's necessarily their general kind of basic state of living. And I want to just encourage you here, if you're wanting to get more out of life, really go back, watch these videos, or watch this video, take note of the 7 things, and really do a self-audit. Am I living in the space of wealth and prosperity and abundance? And if you're not, ask yourself why, and what do you need to do to raise the stakes? What do you need to do to make it so that there is no other option for you but to live from the headspace of wealth and abundance and like rich people do? I know what it was for me. It was, actually, it was seeing a couple people close to me die and realizing there is nothing in my life that could possibly be worse than dying with regret. There is no failure greater than regret, because regret is the final failure. Regret is a notice of failure with another notice that says you're out of time to do anything about it. And I would rather fail 100 times trying to create the life that I want and being willing to take risks and gambles and even be reckless and crazy by some people's estimation than to get to the end of life and get that final failure notice that also says you're out of time. So for me, that was how I raised the stakes. And all that to say, a final note of caution. You know, one of I think the dangers of personal development or starting to really shift your life is because so many of us have spent so much time baked in the way things were, the way we were taught, or the status quo, or society, the society of average outcomes, or whatever we want to call it. We spent so much time in there. And then we suddenly realize there's this other way of being out there, and there's this other world of possibilities, and we get excited, and we get almost greedy, and it's like, I can't wait to get over there. And people talk about changing your environment and creating separation from negative influences and rethinking, how you use your time in non-traditional ways. And basically it's about how to get less like most people and more different from most people. And there's a risk in that of becoming judgmental or unempathetic. And more than that, there's never a value. It's never productive to be alienating or off-putting to people. Your energy, it's about becoming more positive. And as you start to make these changes, the goal should be to deepen your empathy and deepen your compassion and try to be uplifting and inspiring to people, not to be like, oh, haha, nanny, nanny, boo-boo, I figured it out, and you're still poor and your life still sucks, so I'm gonna be being cool over here. Maya Angelou quote that loops in my head all the time: people forget what you say, they'll forget what you do, but they'll never forget how you make them feel. I think as you start to get blessed with more abundance and more positive outcome, as you start to make these kind of changes, you have an even greater responsibility to be an empathetic person that it feels really, really good to be around, because that's the invitation that's going to draw more people into this success. Because when you're truly in a state of abundance, there's no limit to it. It's not something you need to greedily cordon off for yourself. It's a vast blue ocean, and there's plenty of it for everyone. It's about building better systems. It's about optimizing process. It's about reducing conflict. If we could just optimize everything, there is plenty of nourishment on this world, plenty of capital, plenty of resources, plenty of love, plenty of all the good things in this world to take care of many more people than are currently here. There is no scarcity in this world. And so as you start to embody some of these traits and see some of these positive outcomes, really, really focus on staying empathetic and staying positive and staying warm and staying inviting and uplifting for other people. Don't get cocky, because the reality is you can never say of another person that if you had lived their exact life and you had their exact set of circumstances that you can know for sure, you would do anything different than what they do. So judgment is always a logical fallacy. So to wrap all that up, I want to give you 3 quick things you can do. 1, buy a book. The next thing, and this is totally self-interested for me to say, like and subscribe to my channel. The 3rd quick thing is I want you to subtract something from your life. Find one thing, do an audit of your life. What is one thing that is either negative or neutrally non-valuable, and just get rid of it. Find something that isn't serving or adding value to your life and say, okay, enough. Today, I let that go, okay?
If you loved that episode, then you're definitely gonna love this one. Check it out.
Hustle is a lifestyle. Hustle is finishing the work and saying, okay, what's next? Hard work, you start, you work, and then you stop. Hustle, you're always on. That said, let's talk about what hustlers know that hard workers don't.